Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today's webinar topic is for what is worth informing student investments in themselves through ROI calculators. So please do come on in, have a seat. If you're joining us from the East Coast, I would say good afternoon. If you're joining us from Central, good morning. And if you would, as I usually ask, if you can just let us know where you're joining us from, what institution or organization in the chat, we would greatly appreciate it. Want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and I will send out the recording to you as soon as it becomes available. There's also a short, I would say 5-question survey at the end. If you would be so kind to complete that survey for us, we would appreciate it as well. If you have questions, please use the Q&A. I'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you want to put the question there or if you have any comments, do so as well. And thank you for joining us, and we'll get started here soon. So we do have Morehouse. Welcome, Morehouse, Dallas College, the Mountain View campus. Welcome. Have Savannah State, Talladega. Welcome, Talladega. Glad to see you here today. Amarillo College. Welcome, welcome, and welcome. So as everyone is coming in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our great speakers today. I am going to start off with Casey Klepper. Casey serves in the Office of Institutional Research and Analysis, helping to transform traditional institutional research data into timely and meaningful information. Klepper has more than a decade of experience in higher education, specializing in college readiness, student success, financial aid policy, and student financial wellness, including food and housing insecurity. He earned a BA in History and Government from the University of Texas at Austin and a Master of Public Affairs from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. Welcome, Casey, and thank you for presenting for us today. Next, we have Dr. David Mahan. Dr. Mahan is the founding executive director of the Dallas College Research Institute. He has served as the Associate Vice President, Data and Advanced Analytics at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, as well as the Assistant Provost of Institutional Effectiveness at Manhattan College, Bronx, New York, and Director of Institutional Research Effectiveness at Bellarmine University. Dr. Mahan has worked for almost 20 years as an executive leader in higher education in areas of public policy research, academic assessment, accreditation, strategic planning, institutional research, and student recruitment. Dr. Mahan holds a PhD in educational leadership and organizational development from the University of Louisville College of Education and Human Development. Welcome, Dr. Mahan, and thank you as well. Next, we have Navi Dalawal. He is an economic analyst at the Research Institute at Dallas College, whose work focuses on understanding the financial returns to the cost of higher education from a student perspective. Navi previously worked as an academic data an analyst at Uplift Education, a K-12 school district in North Texas. He also previously served as a research analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, with a focus on regional economics. Navi holds a Master of Science in Economics from the Barcelona School of Economics and a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematical Economic Analysis and Policy Studies from Rice University. Welcome, Navi. And last but not least, we have Jeff Webster. Jeff has worked with Trellis since 1986 and now holds the position of Director of Research. Jeff has overseen numerous studies on student loan defaults, debt burdens, student retention, and college affordability. Thank you, Jeff. We do have a couple more people who came in, Texas A&M International University, Lakeview College. Thank you again, welcome. And as I stated earlier, if you have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat. We will have a small or quick survey at the end. If you complete that, I'll appreciate it. And I will send out the recording for this webinar as soon as it's available. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to David, Navi, and Casey for joining us in what I hope to be a very interactive discussion about the debt to earnings calculators that your two organizations have developed. And I really want this to be a true dialogue. So for the attendees, please start submitting your questions about this, your comments in the comments section, and we'll try to incorporate that into the discussion as we go, and certainly by the end of the webinar. I want to kind of provide a little bit of context, I think, for these tools. These debt to earning tools were developed at a time when many of us are questioning the value of college education. And we've seen college costs, both direct and indirect, rise for decades. And student debt is making a whole generation of college students worried sick about paying them off. For years, higher education pointed to statistics showing earnings of an earnings boost of $1 million for lifetime earnings for students receiving a bachelor's degree versus a high school diploma. And what's happened is gradually critics have kind of chipped away at that iconic measurement, emphasizing that, hey, meeting earnings just say have to better, have to, importantly, have to worse. And the half that does worse, there's a lot of variation in that band. So, you have situations where, you have community college students earning more than bachelor degree holders. And so kind of putting some question into the $1 million figure. And another chip into that iconic measurement is that it just reflects the success stories, those who have been able to graduate. And so we know that there's a lot of people who have some college, no degree, but a lot of debt. So what I'm focusing on here is that both of your tools really push way beyond that one singular figure to provide a much more nuanced story of what's happening out there with student outcomes. And really want to give you both an opportunity to talk about and give an overview of your tools. But before we do that, I want to just kind of get started with a couple of questions. I'll start with David. And these are kind of related, but what is the backstory of the creation of this tool? And how do you characterize the problem that your tool is addressing?
Yeah, and thank you, Jeff, for the question and putting this webinar together in your very modest way. Of course, Trellis has been on the forefront of putting these types of tools together, and actually, you guys still have a really valuable tool. And so, I thank you for letting us showcase our work at Dallas College and the Research Institute. This is just a really exciting opportunity. First and foremost, I would just say that our audience, our primary target was to look at leadership, folks that could impact budgeting and institutional effectiveness to begin to understand these larger trends across student groups, and then, of course, across various pathways and degree programs and majors. So we really focused on that audience, and what we're going to walk you through today is really our journey. Iterative is what we say, a journey that starts with this group, but we ultimately would like to get these tools to a place where advisors and students can use those as well. And that's easier said than done. We certainly learned this the hard way because we've done some pilot trainings with our advisors, and they said, we really need more in a more specific way that's fine-tuned with the specific programs within Dallas College and our student information system. So we have a really interesting but exciting story to tell in terms of how we've begun to go down this path of assessing our value proposition to our students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've done a really great job. I think it's a terrific tool. And um, yeah, just thanks for joining us. And so, Casey, just real quick, same questions for you. What's the backstory? What problem are y'all trying to address?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. I worked on Jeff's team for 7 years, so nice to be back with my Trellis family.
Yeah.
So the University of Texas system started this CQT and this work in 2014 when there was a lot of questions about the value of education and putting a dollar amount on that ROI. So UT system wanted to start to show some information beyond what they already knew intrinsically was the value of higher education. So they created a tool in which we looked at median earnings for graduates by program of major, and then slowly started building on that tool, first with the partnership with Texas Workforce Commission, and then with the U.S. Census Bureau to get students that had moved out of Texas information about them. And really just 6 or 7 years of working with students to tweak the tool and do user testing and make it the best it could be.
Yeah, and I feel like you're really pushing the envelope on your data sources and working real hard to, try to have a tool that really does reflect what reality is out there. So yeah, I think that's really great. And so yeah, I think with that, maybe we hand it off. I think maybe Navi, you're gonna share your screen, and we'll learn more about the Dallas College tool.
And thanks again, Jeff, for the introductions and the context. Again, I'm David Mahan. I serve as the founding executive director of the Research Institute. Today, my team and I will share a few of our data tools we've been developing to measure and assess the return on investment at Dallas College. We're excited to be part of this conversation, as understanding what makes college worthwhile from a student standpoint is a critical part of our mission. I'm going to share a little background on who we are and what we do, and then I'll turn it over to Navi Dhaliwal, our economic analyst on the team, to walk us through a few of our interactive tools. The Research Institute is a relatively new group at Dallas College with a mission of producing education-focused action research that is relevant to the Dallas College community and the broader region we serve. We're a small team of 7 people, with some of our roles shown there at the top right corner of the slide. Our team was hired in January 22, so we're just about a year and a half into this new unit. As we came out of COVID pandemic, the key topics that Dallas College leadership was most interested in was the value proposition to students, particularly in light of enrollment declines at community colleges. So we conduct longitudinal mixed methods research, not only on ROI, but a range of topics. You see there at the bottom, a research agenda highlights, and that includes attainment, dual enrollment, student debt, alongside of our regional partners, many of whom are listed there at the right bottom there under key partnerships. On today's theme of what college is worth and informing student investments in themselves, one of the things we'd like to think about what really affects the value of college to a prospective student. So those are the economic or financial returns that are often cited as the number one key influencing students' decision whether or not to enroll. As a community college, we want to be very attentive to this need with our students. They're trying to move from many times a low income background to a sustainable, livable wage. So the primary focus of most of our data dashboards is that financial cost and the benefits, or the monetary value of college. But we've also looked at these non-monetary factors by supplementing quantitative analysis with qualitative and survey research through alumni focus groups, interviews, and questionnaires. It's important to acknowledge that every student's experience is quite different, and we've tried to be especially mindful of seeing where gaps in outcomes may exist across the program of study and demographic groups. One of our first tasks as a team last spring was to research the question of how to assess and measure long-term return on investment, or ROI, as we say, of a Dallas College experience. And that is summing up those earning benefits of college over the course of a career minus the cost to the student. So we conduct literature reviews and meta-analysis with the existing research, and we quickly found that there were many distinct data sources and methodologies used to define and measure the value of college, but not a lot of consensus. In addition, not much existing research specifically incorporated a community college perspective or reflected the diversity of our population. So as many community colleges that are on the webinar and in the chat, we serve so many different age groups and experiences and backgrounds, and the growth of dual credit is in there, the traditional age students, and of course the returning adult learners. We didn't see one approach or a clear roadmap in terms of measuring ROI for these distinct populations. So when it comes to calculators and data tools, we first developed our dashboards covering topics like ROI, economic mobility, student debt, earnings, to answer the questions about our own institution, Dallas College. Where was Dallas College doing well as far as student financial returns? Were students attaining livable, sustainable wages? And were they doing so when we disaggregated by the student group and the academic program? We wanted a better way to track our progress and determine where we had opportunities to improve. To do this, we ended up including information about other colleges in the region, in the state, and across the country in our tools to add context on our peers and also to better understand the outcomes of our students who transfer to four-year settings. The only thing I'd like to mention, the other thing I'd like to mention that we followed an iterative process. And so we use that word from the beginning, iterative, because we're still learning from feedback and continuing to improve. We're going to show snippets of 3 dashboards today that we've developed in the past year. And then we're going to walk through our latest tool to highlight how we got to where we are now. So that's kind of a compilation of those 3 tools that we're going to show on the slides. So to do that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mr. Navi Dhaliwal. He's our economic analyst and has really delved into the research and the creation and the architecture behind these tools. So Navi, please.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mahan, and hello, everyone. My name is Navi Dhaliwal. I'm an economic analyst on the team at the Research Institute at Dallas College. And it's really a treat to be here with you all today. As someone who's newer to higher ed, coming from a K-12 and economics background, particularly in that K-12 world, I think this question of what college is worth and how we can inform students who are in that decision-making process is super critical. And so I'm delighted to join you all for this conversation. I've helped to create several data dashboards at Dallas College related to the value of college, and we're going to walk through a few of those today. But I want to start by plugging our website and Tableau public page. Tableau is the platform we've used for most of our data visualizations, and all of them are publicly available. And as we'll see, many of these tools contain data not just on Dallas College, but on other institutions around the country. And you can access our Tableau public page at the link or using the QR code shown on the screen. I should note that most of our tools are best experienced on a computer, but we have tried to incorporate mobile formatting where we can. And we also have a full website that you can visit at dallascollege.edu/Research Institute. And that's going to include all of our written reports, briefs, and infographics related to these data visualizations. So I'm going to go through our first few dashboards. There's 3 that I highlighted there fairly quickly, but we're happy to take any specific questions about those during the Q&A time later on. So the first dashboard I'm going to showcase is one of the first ones we created. We called this our return on investment dashboard, and here are just a few screenshots from this tool. This tool contains projections up to 40 years after college entry of long-term student ROI. So when we think about that $1 million figure, this was one of the first places that we started at Dallas College. This tool uses data from the college scorecard, which means we're able to pull in thousands of post-secondary institutions across the country. However, the data only cover federal financial aid recipients, and that's roughly about 60% of undergraduate students. In addition, the institution level earnings data in this tool cover a mix of all students who started at the college, which is going to include those who complete, withdraw, and transfer. So not just graduates only. but they're not disaggregated by group. So all those students are sort of mixed together in the earnings outcomes. We use data points in this tool like median earnings after college and the average net price of college, alongside a methodology from the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce to estimate long-term ROI. So this dashboard really helped provide a baseline ROI for us for Dallas College of about $893,000 over a 40-year period. And we're also able to see how that compared for select demographic groups with data available in the college scorecard. So these are the bar charts shown below. And then also how outcomes at Dallas College compared to peer institutions. So you can see Dallas College is this red dot, with these blue dots being other community colleges in Texas. One of the things that really stood out when we first looked at long-term ROI using that ROI dashboard was that low-income students whose families earn at or below $30,000 per year on the FAFSA had lower earnings and long-term ROI than did all students, and specifically high-income and middle-income students. And we saw ROI gaps based on family income, not just at Dallas College, but across most institutions nationally. So observing this prompted us to sort of iterate, as we've said, and create another tool, this one called our Economic Mobility Dashboard, which focused on a broader set of outcomes for low-income students. So this tool also uses college scorecard data, but it factored in two additional variables. So student loan debt for low-income students, as well as completion and transfer rates. These two variables, along with 10-year ROI, were weighted equally to calculate a score for associate granting colleges, something that we called an economic mobility index for two-year colleges, or the EMI2. We were really inspired to create this by work being done at Third Way, which created an economic mobility index that only covered four-year colleges and universities and looked at how well those institutions were serving low-income students. So compared to our first dashboard, I think one of the things that we learned from this, is this really brought place and geography to the forefront. We included a map here. We had extra information from the Census Bureau on things like county economic conditions, so county poverty rates, median household income, to kind of put into context the population that each community college or two-year college in this tool was serving. And then also, I think by including debt in a tool like this gave us a much fuller accounting of costs than we had in our original tool. The last dashboard I'm going to quickly walk through before we get to our latest release is one specifically focused on debt to earnings. We have a report to accompany this tool forthcoming where we sort of describe some of the trends we see in this dashboard. But we really developed this primarily to give us a more comprehensive look at program level outcomes and to see whether programs at Dallas College, in Texas and around the country were leaving students with no or manageable levels of debt in relation to students' potential earnings. So just like the previous two dashboards, this one uses college scorecard data. It incorporates a map, it features debt prominently, but some of what it does differently are that it allows users to specify a credential level. So this includes bachelor's degrees, certificates, not just associate's degrees, and also the selective field of study. So this tool doesn't just cover the two-year post-secondary sector, and the data are really specific to programs rather than being about the institution as a whole. The other thing we were able to do with this was to bring in several different proposed thresholds and policy rules used to define what constitutes a healthy debt to earnings ratio. So you could choose gainful employment rule or building a talent strong Texas as your rules. The dashboard would color code accordingly programs that had manageable levels of debt according to that rule, and then list out the debt to earnings ratios by institution and field of study. So that brings us to our latest tool, and this is the one I want to demo for y'all. This is the value of college dashboard. This is one we've recently developed as we've steadily tried to synthesize things into a simpler, more user-friendly format. So I'm going to open this in my browser and walk us through it. Hopefully you're still able to see everything okay here with the screen sharing. This dashboard contains 4 sections. These cover post-college earnings, which is at the very top, college costs and debt, return on investment, and then earnings and debt by field of study. The way this tool works is that you select one college or university at the very top of the page. And by default, we have Dallas College selected, but you can change this to any institution which has earnings and net price data in the college scorecard. And the rest of the page is essentially a profile of typical student outcomes at whichever institution you selected. There's a few simple drop-down menus throughout the page, which allow for customization. And there's also tooltips available on every figure. If you just hover over them, that's going to give you a description in words of whatever data are shown in the figure. So just to walk through this very briefly, starting with this post-college earnings section of the dashboard, we have some blue vertical bars on the left that reflect outcomes 6, 8, and 10 years after college entry, along with lines that show the poverty wage, typical wage for high school graduates with no college, age 25 to 34, and the living wage. And on the right, we try to add some more context to this by showing things like the interquartile range, so the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile of earnings. So half of all students are earning between that amount. We also include the percent of students who earn more than just those with a high school diploma would. And then also a breakdown by demographic group for the groups with available data in the scorecard. We take this living wage and poverty wage data from the MIT Living Wage Calculator. And you can adjust that if you don't want to look at the county level living wage. Let's say you want to roll this up to look at a state level. That'll update the living wage and poverty wage. The high school wage comes from American Community Survey data, the 2025 year estimates. Everything in this tool has been adjusted, though, to be in 2022 dollars. So we want this to reflect current conditions as best as possible using CPIU. The second section of this dashboard shows college costs and debt over time. We built in 3 scenarios into our tool. The first scenario is one in which students pay the cost of college completely upfront. For Dallas College, we estimate or assume that it takes students about 3 years. So we have this at 3. For bachelor's level institutions, we have this at 5 in the tool, but they pay the cost completely upfront in this first scenario. The second one shows a combination where students pay part of the cost upfront and pay the median amount of debt paid over 10 years on the standard 10-year repayment plan. And then the final scenario is, what if students pay nothing upfront, but pay everything off over time via debt? And so the figures on the right update depending on the scenario that you choose. The scenario you choose here is also reflected in this last section related to these top 3, this last section of return on investment. So this $1 million figure we talk about over time, we do include that here. We break that out by demographic groups, just like we had in our ROI dashboard, as well as a debt to earnings figure. This one here being debt as a percentage of first year earnings, cumulative debt as a percentage of first year earnings. The very last section of the tool looks at programs of study. And this is something that was really important to us, but we find that the data is not always sufficient to think about long-term projections or outcomes when we get down to the field of study level. So here what we've done is include median debt for each program of study, as well as median first-year earnings, and an opportunity to sort of sort this by the ratio, by earnings, with all the programs and credential levels being shown here, being only those that correspond to the institution you chose at the very top of the page. And only those that are large enough to have data in the college scorecard. So just to give an example of how this tool could work for another institution before I turn things back over to Dr. Mahan, let's say that I want to look at an institution in the UT system. If I want to look at UT Austin, I can select that. And the earnings in the tool, the debt, will update accordingly throughout, as well as the programs of study being offered at the institution will update as well. I'm going to go back into our presentation. And I'll turn things over to Dr. Mahan to close us out.
Thank you, Navi. And you notice in that debt to earnings dashboard that we are at a 4-digit SIP, and there's a clustering of those programs within that 4-digit SIP. And we'll talk more about the specificity of that and some of the challenges as we go from these tools for the leadership and for budgeting officers to more granular, specific kind of tools within programs of study. But it's important to really understand that this is just a sample of the findings in our interactive tools. Our set of dashboards have all been more on the technical side with a research audience in mind and leadership at Dallas College and embedded in student success. So, for example, research may be used to support assessing the effectiveness of academic programs in that budgeting process. So that was our first audience. However, over these past months, as I said, there's been this clamoring for more data, more timely information from the folks that are directly serving students in advising roles. So we've been seeking ways to revise and condense our tools to empower these counselors, advisors, potentially even prospective students and families with greater information and awareness of the value of college. So we did conduct a pilot in March, and we can talk more about that as questions come in. But we're using that feedback from those advisors and that pilot to guide us going forward. A closing thought I'll just leave us with is, we showed today that primarily to rely on aggregate data from College Scorecard. An advantage of this is that tool, we can study patterns across state lines. We can see how Dallas College compares to other institutions across the nation, but there are limitations as well. So we don't have data for some specific demographic groups like race, ethnicity, and we can't always look at the programs, as Navi said, with the kind of granularity we need to because there's a redaction with small cell size. And they're rolled up in this 4-digit SIP. So those are some of the reasons we've started to push for more data sources, such as Census Bureau, PSEO, that's the post-secondary employment outcomes. And we are also seeking to use more of that student level records from the Texas Workforce Commission and other sources. So just something to keep in mind. And again, it's part of our journey, our iterative journey that we're sharing here. So thank you. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, David. This is just an amazing amount of work that y'all put into this. And it provides a whole lot of really important context. And I mean, as you're saying, just thinking about our attendees, they can plug in their schools and suddenly they're getting sort of information not only on their own institution, but how they compare to some of their, peers. I would think that would be pretty darn valuable. So have you gotten much feedback from any of your sister institutions?
It's interesting that you asked that question, Jeff, because we have showcased it to the coordinating board and to at AACC with community colleges national conference. It's interesting. The culture has changed so much that I think that they welcome additional assessments that help them kind of get into this space of assessing that value proposition to their students. And so it's mostly been positive. It's certainly not a gotcha kind of thing. It's more of a, this is a national data set. Let's roll it up and talk about what we're doing well and what we're not. So it has been positives thus far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just a reminder to our attendees, put your questions, comments in the chat, and we'll get to those. And thank you, Navi, for showing the, demoing the tool, but also providing the link in the chat. So Casey, your head has been in this. You're thinking, about some of the same issues. You've now been exposed to the Dallas College tool. Do you have Any thoughts, reactions?
Yeah, I think it's a great tool, and I really applaud them putting in other institutions. So it's more than just a Dallas College tool, but really a service to the community. One thing that I really thought was spectacular is that you put information about demographics and equity in the tool, and I was curious, how do you want that information used, and what sort of things do you plan to do around communicating that information in the future?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, Casey, because I feel like that's an area that we probably didn't get a chance to talk a lot about, but is critical to our mission and frankly, the students that we serve at Dallas College. And so I would say that, with each data source, there's limitations. And so we can show some of these wage gaps by demographic groups, but we had to really implement a full mixed design, longitudinal kind of approach to begin answering these more holistically, I think is the right word to use. And so, for example, we have a sister research agency or research unit at Dallas College called the LMIC, the Labor Market Intelligence Center, and they linked our graduate records with the MZ data system, now Lightcast. And so they shared those records with us. And then we could look at occupation codes in addition to these wage outcomes with scorecard data. And what we found was that, the occupations tell a story based on graduates within a program. For example, we looked at gender gaps with business administration graduates, and we saw this big gap between males and females. And then when we looked at the occupation, we saw that females were disproportionately represented in jobs such as administrative support or office management or customer service. And our males were looking at things like leadership and specialization within consulting. And so we further examined that with qualitative research and talked directly to our students and our faculty. And they're basically saying, there's barriers for our female students that were not necessarily transparent in that quantitative data. We have a high proportion of single moms at Dallas College. And so what was really interesting is they tell their story and then they're not necessarily switching jobs after they graduate. And so there's a social capital, kind of a change in trajectory in one's career if you're in a professional work environment. That is, they're working in the field of study, I think is the way Lightcast puts it. And so we talked to advisors, we talked to career service folks and faculty about the internship and the first job and how critical that is to get them on a different trajectory where they can begin to dream and think about where they could be in 10 years, as opposed to kind of maintaining that same job, but just finishing our credential. And so they took really a holistic approach, Casey. I wish we could say we found all that from the quantitative data, but we have this fantastic staff of qualitative researchers and survey design folks, and they had to pull all that together to make these kind of conclusions. But then when we take that back to Dallas College leadership and say, this is what we found, they've been all ears. And you may have seen the news release this past a week with that Bezos preschool academy at 2 of our campuses, really starting to think about those single moms and how they can enhance quality for their children while they're working on a credential, while the mom is working on a credential. We've also seen in Dallas Promise program, which is free for Dallas County students, we also see the parents of the Dallas County recipients are also eligible for a free education. So we're really trying to move that research and that data to kind of bolster our argument that these kinds of things work. But gosh, I wish it was easy because there's so much research that had to go into this before we could make that conclusion.
Very nice. So the Dallas College tool is really focused on practitioners, policymakers, senior management at institutions. So Casey, the UT system tool had a different audience. You want to talk a little bit about that and show our attendees more about your tool?
Absolutely. So CQT really began as a tool focused on students. So it's free, it's online. It has salary, debt, jobs information all in one place. And it shows the median earnings of all graduates of UT system institutions that are working full-time by degree level and also by 300 areas of study. It shows this information 1, 5, 10 years after graduation. We also have median student debt for these graduates and a debt to income ratio. And then over time, there's so much more we've added. We've added links and descriptions for programs that students are exploring. We have information about Texas workforce trends and also the percent of undergraduates that are continuing their education beyond the baccalaureate in the data. And I'll breeze through this because we talked a little bit about it already, but the University of Texas system was one of the first systems in the country to build a website that provided this information on the statistics of actual students after graduation. We started our collaboration with the Texas Workforce Commission to match student graduates with unemployment insurance records that the Texas Workforce Commission has. And then slowly we added a partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau, which was the first of its kind to try to get information about those graduates that were working outside of Texas. We launched a big redesigned CQT in 2017. In 2018, about 2 or 3 years after we started it, we finally got the U.S. Census Bureau data integrated and launched that. And really over this whole period of time, we were visiting institutions, doing focus groups with students, doing user experience testing, and really trying to make the tool as clear as possible for students and as valuable to their questions as possible. Over time, the CQT tool and the data behind it is starting to be used beyond students. But how we would like to see the CQT tool used is first, we want college-going students to have information about the benefits of earning a degree. We want those students before they enter college to be able to look at all of our institutions and all of the programs with our institutions and think about what they might make. We also want students to plan for their future while they're enrolled. So while they're enrolled, we've developed branded CQTs that are just for the campuses that are branded in their colors and their logos so that they can present the students who are already admitted with information about majors and what they might expect to earn moving forward. Certainly with this sort of data around post-credential earnings, there's a risk that when you're only presenting students this information without context, they're going to be driven to programs of study that may earn more money. So what is really important for us is to help institutions and ourselves to explain that there's more to career and happiness in a career than just earnings outcome. And that if the students have a passion for a program and a program of study, that there is an accurate roadmap that they can look at that sees what they might make 1 year out, but then can see 5 and 10 years out where that major may have higher earnings than that first year out. And then finally, we're just seeing so much more of the higher education community and the leadership at our institutions start to use this information in decision making. And really now we're seeing beyond that into faculty, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But to show you a little bit about the tool, you land on a site like this, and there's really 3 buckets of CQT. There's CQT undergrad as the main tool. And you can click on see just for results for text for those graduates who stay and work in Texas, or you can look nationally, which includes those work in Texas, but also outside. The value of just looking at Texas, that data is a little bit more up to date. The U.S. Census Bureau lags behind about a year. So they're presented both that way. The way we organize the data is a UT system graduate that had earned a baccalaureate is put in a bucket. If they've ever earned a higher degree, they're removed out of that bucket. So you really are comparing only students who just earned a bachelor's degree in the main CQT undergrad. Then there's also CQT graduate, though, for those students who earned a master's, doctoral, professional degree. So you can look at that to kind of understand the median earnings for those students. And then we even have a CQT medical for the MD students that come out of the UT system. Once you enter, and I'm going to show you information that's the Texas data, but it all looks the same on this next page. And what you do is the student would go to the left-hand side. They would select a major or several majors and an institution they wanted to look at. Here we're looking at UT El Paso, and there's multiple selections for civil engineering, accounting, and kinesiology. This main charts are really what we're directing students to. And moving left to right, the dark blue bar would be the first year median earnings. The lighter blue would be fifth year median earnings, and the green would be 10th year median earnings. And then the red bar would be the median loan amount for those students in the program that took out loans. So for civil engineering, 57,000 was the median earnings first year, but by 10 years, the median earnings were 92,000. The average or the median loan debt for those students in that program was 17,000. Below, we have links to the institution's program sites so that while students are exploring these majors, they can go right to the site to learn more about it. And then up top, when you scroll back, there are several other tabs that you can look at. And as you click on these tabs, it digs into even more information. So the first tab would be digging into these earnings by percentile. So here what we're looking at is each column is the first year earnings on the top, the green would be fifth year earnings, and the red 10-year earnings. And here we're showing the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. So like Jeff's talked about below or earlier, students can look at this and say, well, what moves me from the median income to the 75th percentile? Are there certain skills that I need to either learn how to articulate that I've already learned? Are there skills that I need to learn in the future? And how do I talk with my institution about that range of earnings? We also have debt to income ratios presented on one of those tabs. So here, the recommended threshold for paying student debt is that your monthly student debt repayment on the standard repayment plan should only be 10% of your monthly take-home income. If this is standard repayment plan, of course, students can go on an income-driven repayment plan, which would lower these debt-to-income ratios, but also those plans tend to not pay off principal as much, if sometimes at all. But what's important here is students can say, okay, my first year, maybe my debt to income ratio is a little higher, but at the 5th and 10th year, it goes down. So they can plan for that first year out where they may be paying a higher percentage of their monthly salary towards repaying debt. On the bottom column, these are the percent of first-time college students who took out loans in this program at all. So students can look at, as they're comparing majors, how many college students in these majors took out loans in general. In the CQT suite, there's also information about Texas workforce for students both across the UT system, but it's also for Texas at large. There's 2 pages. The first page are where are recent UT graduates currently working in Texas. So students can look at degree level, they could select a major or several majors, and they can select an industry area. For this one, the industry area is educational services. And on the left, there's a chart that shows how many graduates within this industry are working in the different occupations. And there's a bar chart on the right that also displays this. So here we're seeing that the majority of UT system graduates that are working in educational services are working in elementary and secondary schools, with a lower amount working at college and universities, junior colleges, and on down. There's just a ton of industry areas. So you can look at healthcare and just get you a snapshot of right now where are students working. There's another tab that looks at growth in Texas. So here we present the estimated job openings and job growth across Texas. Once again, you can select a location in this instance. You can region in Texas. You can select an industry you want to look at. You can select a specific occupation if you'd like, instead of just the industry. And you can even select what education level are required for these jobs. And it will show you with these selections, computer and mathematical occupations there's estimated 7,200 job openings and right now, and then shows information about job growth too. So students have been using this information a lot, but more and more the institutions are using the data in different ways. So one thing we've seen is salary negotiation training for students. So if a student has the actual median amount that folks with their degree in their program make in Texas, then they're more empowered to say to an employer, actually, this is what students with my degree are making. Do you think there's room for us to negotiate? And we think can be really helpful, especially for students who may not have any experience with negotiation. I know that I myself never really thought about that you could actually negotiate a salary when getting a job offer. I just thought, oh, well, I'm just lucky to have a job. And many students think that way, that especially ones that are seeing a major wage growth in comparison to how they were raised, they may say, well, this is excellent, and I'm just going to take it without considering that others may make more in their field. We're also seeing a recruitment for programs with an eye on diversity and growth. One institution is taking this information and really trying to improve the diversity of their STEM fields by going into high schools and even earlier into junior highs, showing the sort of earnings you can make in STEM fields and starting a recruitment process to improve race and gender representation in their STEM fields. We're seeing academic and career advisors using these tools in conversations with students, sometimes in the early years where folks are trying to decide what they might want to major in, and sometimes when students hit up against maybe a competitive program by which you have to apply to get into an upper division, and they're forced to think about another major they want to go into. There's also just in general career advisors using this a ton to help students think about where they might get a job in what field, things like that. More and more, we're seeing this data used by deans, department heads, and faculty in a number of areas. First, there's accreditation and program review processes. Some of these majors traditionally have used surveys to gain information about the earnings that their graduates make for accreditation program review purposes. And more of those survey responses are just plummeting. And so they're turning to tools like this that can provide actual student level record data in aggregate to inform these decisions. Some departments are also that have strong connections with industry in their region are using these tools to have conversations about first year earnings and with employers and say, hey, we're working to send you students that are talented and in the fields that you want. Can you work to make this first year income better and more livable? We're seeing it in student financial wellness and student loan counseling, and also targeting pilot programs to think about majors that may have low first year earnings that may benefit from a micro credential. Some information and research from Burning Glass, which is now Lightcast, showed that if a studio arts major had a certificate in Adobe Acrobat, they would make their first year earnings are increased by 34%. So there are things around that can really, this information can help institutions target those kind of interventions. So with that, I'll toss it back. Thank you again for letting me share.
Yeah, that's really nice, Casey. Y'all have really evolved a really good system. And I think it's really interesting that, your initial focus was on informing students and their decisions. And gradually it's moving more to having practitioners also use it. And whereas the Dallas College tool, was situated mostly for, the practitioners, and you're wanting to evolve it to also be informative to your students. So David, in our 5 minutes we have left, do you want to sort of reflect on the CQT system tool?
Yeah, and thank you, Casey. I feel like that was really informative and helpful for us. We played with some of these tools, but having you walk through it and really explain some of the uses was just fantastic. Great work. We'd be curious as to if you've done any usage analysis in terms of those proportions of users, and as Jeff said, that focus on students and how much they're currently using as opposed to some of the other groups that now have access and that you found innovative ways to get them to use the data.
Sure. So we use Google Analytics. There's some limitations there because it doesn't always show the amount that people are spending within the tool, which is Power BI, just remaining on the site. So we don't know as much as we would like, but we do know that every time we visit campuses and talk about this information, we see spikes in usage. So we try to have a presence on campus, continually talk to students. More and more, we're trying to work with institutions to put it into processes like academic advising or things like that in order to create like a more steady usage across years. We are seeing though that career services just use it a ton. And they've always been a very big user. More and more, though, we're seeing reports of people using it in admissions and things like that, and we try to track that reporting from institutions.
Okay. So it looks like we had a question in the chat. I think this is for David or Navi on the value of college dashboard. Is ROI based on cost of college and earnings at those years after college markets? But how does that compare to those who do not go to college, i.e. had no college debt, or associate only with no or less college debt based on their expected earnings?
Yeah. Navi, why don't you jump back in here?
That's a great question. And currently the tool doesn't really show that counterfactual in that section of the dashboard or what students could have earned with a different credential experience. At the top of the page, when we're just focused on the earnings data, we have that line to show typical high school graduate earnings, but we haven't converted that into an ROI measure for that portion of the dashboard. I will say in some of our other tools, like the original ROI dashboard we developed, we looked at that amount and estimated at the time in 2020 dollars, the return to Dallas College of about $893,000 of sum of future earnings minus costs. And comparatively, somebody with a high school diploma alone in Texas, if we just sum their future earnings and they have no costs associated with college, we placed that around $690,000. So it ended up being about a net $200,000, sort of better off over 40 years.
Okay, thank you. We're about running out of time. Teresa, how are we?
Yes, thank you so much. We're almost at the hour, but if anyone has any other questions, please, I can either unmute you or if you want to put it in the chat. I do want to give everyone an opportunity while we have these great minds together here to ask questions if you have some. So I'll keep it the chat open here for a second. I do have another question from Paula. Is there anyone we can meet with after this to discuss this further? Great question.
So we are in this growth phase of our new research institute at Dallas College. And so it's really our pleasure to meet with stakeholders and folks that are in the process of building dashboards or just want to use our new system. And so certainly, please reach out to us. If you go to our website, you'll see our email addresses and we can set something up to discuss further.
Yeah, me as well.
I think the link is in the chat for both of the tools. And I'm sorry, Casey.
I'm just going to say I put my email address in there. If anyone ever has any questions, feel free to reach out.
Great. Yeah. I have lots more questions, but I know we're at the hour. You going to pull the hook, Teresa?
Yes, and then also there is a short survey. So when one of the questions in the survey is if you would like more information. So if you can put your information in there, then we can make sure we get in contact with you. So there is another way that you can, get in touch with the panelists, or if you have questions.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate y'all joining us for this. These are two very impressive tools, and y'all put a lot of thought and care into being able to provide a lot of useful information, but also presenting it in a way that's accessible, I think.
I agree.
So I see this as just the beginning of discussion of these type of tools and the issues that they bring on. So thank you very much for being part of it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
David, did you have something?
I was just going to say thank you to Jeff and Bruce and the Trellis team. We really appreciate being part of this.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, everyone have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to complete the survey. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.